The first day of school teaches students something. The question is, are you intentional about what that something is? Today, I want to talk about what the strongest first week lessons actually do and why building classroom culture and teaching content don't have to compete with each other. Welcome to the Secondary Teacher Podcast, the podcast for middle and high school teachers juggling multiple preps to get the strategies to reduce overwhelm so that you don't have to choose between being an effective teacher and prioritizing important relationships. I'm your host, Khristen Massic, a 10-year high school engineering teacher, former middle school assistant principal, and teacher coach. Every week, we will discuss strategies, systems, and time-saving tips to help you not only survive but thrive as a multiple prep teacher. We're starting a new series today, and if you've been following along this summer, you know we've spent a lot of time talking about planning systems, repeatable structures, and reducing decision fatigue. This series is zooming in on something more immediate, the first week of school, specifically how to build the kind of classroom culture that supports learning all year long without sacrificing instructional time to do it. And over the next few episodes, I'm going to share some of the resources inside the Secondary Teacher Systems Toolkit that are designed to help you do exactly that. When I first started teaching, I put a lot of pressure on the first day. Do I go over the syllabus? Do I do an icebreaker? Jump into curriculum? And like a lot of teachers, I kept landing on classic get to know you activity. Sometimes it was bingo, sometimes a worksheet, sometimes students walked around interviewing each other. Then I went to a PD where someone was talking about building classroom culture, and they demonstrated this activity where you give every student a ball of Play-Doh and ask them to sculpt something about themselves. Then you go around and share. I tried it. And I remember standing there in my engineering classroom thinking, what in the world does this have to do with engineering? Nothing. The answer was nothing. And then it got worse because I taught on a block schedule, A days and B days. So I had some students who came to classes on A day, and then they showed up on B day in a different class. And I'm standing there thinking, I cannot do the Play-Doh thing again with kids who already were just here doing this yesterday. So I scrambled to find something else. And whatever landed on for B day felt like an afterthought because it quite honestly was. That's when I started realizing the problem wasn't that I needed a better icebreaker. The problem was I was borrowing activities that weren't built for my context. To be fair, I did eventually find something that worked really well. For my Intro to Engineering Design class, I borrowed a first week activity around a Lego hotel challenge. Students had to design and build something with constraints, think through problems, communicate with partners. It was content adjacent. It was engaging. It surfaced how students thought and collaborated, which was actually useful information for me as a teacher. I loved it, but here's what happened. Students talked. And by the time B-Day rolled around, or the following year when a new group of students had older siblings or friends who'd taken the class, they already knew the tricks. They knew what the best solution looked like before they'd even started. And I had 4 other preps that year with completely different students. So I couldn't use the same activity across courses because students overlapped. I'd have kids in 3rd period who'd already done it 1st period, and the whole thing fell flat. So even a great activity had a short shelf life. And I kept finding myself in the same position every August, starting from scratch again. Here's what I've come to believe after watching a lot of first weeks of school, my own and others' teachers. Classroom culture isn't built during the moments when we stop teaching. It's built through the learning itself. It's built through the conversations students have, the way they approach problems together, the way they listen, disagree, share ideas, and discover what other people in the room are capable of. Your first lesson teaches students far more than your content. It teaches them what learning in your classroom feels like. And if that first experience is a Play-Doh sculpture that has nothing to do with your subject, that's what learning in your classroom feels like. So the question I started asking wasn't, what's a good icebreaker? It was, what kind of first learning experience do I want my students to have? Those are very different questions. As I've coached teachers through first week planning, I've landed on 3 questions worth asking before committing to any opening activity. 1, does this help me learn something meaningful about my students? Not their favorite pizza topping, not their dog's name, how they think, what they notice, how they communicate, how they work with other people, because that's information I'll actually use throughout the year. 2, does it help students learn something meaningful about each other? Not everyone has to become best friends, but students need opportunities to recognize the strengths and perspectives sitting around them. That's where community actually starts, not from an introduction, but from a shared experience. 3, could I use this type of activity again later in the year? This is the filter the Lego hotel failed for me. Because if an activity only works once, if students knowing the tricks defeats the whole purpose, then it's not building a structure they'll recognize and return to. The best first week activities aren't just engaging, they're repeatable. The structure transfers when the content changes. Students can do a version of it in September and a version of it in March and get something different from it both times. That's what makes an activity worth building into your classroom, not just your first week. One of my favorite resources inside the Secondary Teacher Systems Toolkit is called Common Threads, and it's designed specifically for this. Instead of a traditional introduction, students find connections with each other around ideas, experiences, and perspectives that actually relate to your course. They talk, they listen, they find common ground, they explain their thinking, and without anyone announcing, we're building classroom culture today, that's exactly what's happening. And the structure of the activity is repeatable enough that you can bring it back later in the year with the different content, different stakes, different depth, and students will recognize it immediately. That's one less thing to explain and one more opportunity for learning to be the focused. I think about the Play-Doh activity a lot when I work with teachers on first week planning now. Not because it was a terrible idea, but because it was someone else's great idea for someone else's classroom. It worked in the context where I found it demonstrated a room full of teachers from different subjects where generic relationship building made sense. But I wasn't teaching mixed subjects. I was teaching engineering, and my students deserved a first experience that was actually connected to the learning they were about to do. That's the standard I'd encourage you to hold your first week activities to. Not, is this fun? Not, will students enjoy this? But does this help us start becoming the kind of learning community I need us to be? Because that question leads somewhere very different than what's a good icebreaker? Next episode, we're staying on first week culture, but getting even more specific. I'm going to share one of my favorite low prep discussion strategies that gets students talking to each other about content without those awkward, tell us an interesting fact about yourself moments. It's simple enough to use in week 1 and repeatable enough to use all year. That one's coming up next. If you're looking for ready-to-use activities that help you build classroom culture without sacrificing instructional time, the Secondary Teacher Systems Toolkit is in the show notes. It includes the community building activity I mentioned today, along with several other resources designed to help you build classroom systems from the very beginning of the year. Before you go, one question. When students walk out of your classroom after the first day, what do you hope they've learned about being a learner in your room? Because sometimes the most important lessons we teach during the first week isn't found in the curriculum. It's found in the culture we're quietly building from the very beginning. Finish something that makes tomorrow lighter. I'll see you next time.